name is Allison Kennedy. It's nice to meet all of you. I am a Microsoft MVP. Yes, we'll tell you who we are. I'm a duo MVP this year for the first time, which is super exciting. Thanks. So I've been a Power BI MVP for about 3 or 4 years, and I'm now also Excel MVP. So as you can probably figure out from that, I love numbers and things that are black and white and maths equations and being able to get the right answer. And today's talks have been very outside of my comfort zone, and I'm feeling a little bit like I'm following some really tough acts because this is going to be a lot more demo based, a lot more technical, and I'm not used to being the most technical person in the room. But my role is I have been working for the past few years with North Power. You may have heard of them. So they do the lines up in Northland, but I work in the contracting division down here in Auckland. So I try to glean some information about how our relationships with our customers, such as Vector here in Auckland or Wellington Electricity down in Wellington, how those relationships are going. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing on time and when we're supposed to be doing it, all that sort of fun stuff. When I'm not working, I'm in the water if I can be, or in my garden. So I love free diving, and yeah, not spearfishing, just taking photos and hang out with the fish. But if anybody does spearfish, I'll get some fish. And yeah, let's get into it. Show of hands, how many of you use Power BI personally? Excellent. Okay. How many of you use it in your companies? Who doesn't know what Power BI is?
Spell it.
All right, thanks for being honest. You can spell it. I like that there is a little Power BI icon down here as part of the Power Platform because I feel like we've been kicked out. We've kicked ourselves out. Power BI is not really like part of the Power Platform anymore, and that's quite evident sometimes when I'm working with the Power Platform and working with the tools. So again, please forgive me because I am not a Power Platform expert. I'm not a Power BI expert. I just use it every day. So what we're going to talk about today is how I have used Power Apps and Power Automate embedded inside of Power BI. And I've done this because I know Power BI and I love Power BI and I understand Power BI, and this is what I could do to make it work, right? Watching your low code, pro code combination was really fascinating because I can kind of figure out Power Automate. That coding stuff that you were doing was over my head, and it's really nice to hear that when you're a pro coder, you struggle with low code. So made me feel a little bit better about myself, right? So again, I'm going to say the same thing as you did. Please don't judge my code. It's going to be messy and awful, but it's what I know how to do. So we had this challenge at North Power where we are contracted to the customer to go and deliver the planned maintenance on their lines. And sometimes, due to various different reasons, that doesn't happen. It gets rescheduled again. It's canceled, gets postponed into the next year. Eventually it might happen, eventually it might not. And we've got works management systems and scheduling systems and processes and all sorts of fancy things that we do. Some of it's paper-based, some of it's digital. And one of the things that made this particular analysis challenging is that in most of those systems, you've got one activity that you're tracking through its life cycle. And when it's canceled multiple times, you need to go deep into the audit logs and extracting that information from a customer's system, not your own system, is not an easy data analytics challenge to. So as the contractor, we track some of that stuff in Outlook, Excel, in paper work packs, right? And so when management said, well, how big of a problem is this? And what's the cause of the problem? Why are we having these cancellations? What can we do about them? How can we be more efficient? Didn't have an easy way to answer that question. Right. So thus comes this beautiful, elegant, not solution, but it's very functional. And working with engineers, for engineers, going from paper-based system, they all had their own Excel sheets. As a team, they had an Excel sheet, and then management said, well, we want you to fill in our Excel sheet or whatever it may be, right? So we tried to make it as simple as possible and tried to make it look as much like their Excel sheets as possible. Okay, so you'll notice that it is quite basic. Looks like an Excel sheet. It's got their column headings in the same order as their theme Excel sheet. So it mirrors what they're used to seeing. Captures all the information, has all of these filters and things up here for them to be able to filter it down just like they do in their Excel sheet. And then we've got this thing that I popped in here, which you guys might recognize as beautiful, elegant, professional looking Canvas app. Thank you. Yes.
And just in case,
my battery is running low. It's plugged in. Maybe not too.
There we go.
All right. So the really cool thing about using Power Apps inside of Power BI is that the data actually talks to the app and interacts with the app. So when you filter up here, it filters this, but it also filters that. When you select something here, it filters that as well. And so what I'm going to do, I'm not going to show you this actual app. I'm going to show you a copy of one that I have built earlier. And we'll come into here. Start by having a look at the Power BI service. So this is the Power BI report itself. And you'll notice that it's connected to two different data sources. It's connected to our works management system, pulling that data out of the data warehouse, and it's also connected to SharePoint. So, again, I'm not really a Power Platform person. I know it's possible to get a Power App to write back to SQL, but I'm pretty sure it's expensive. So I've been told by the Power BI team because they're trying to find workarounds for y'all. So if you could solve that problem. Was that?
maybe if you go through Fabric.
Maybe if you go through Fabric. Yeah, again, Power BI team is trying to solve that licensing stuff, right? So rather than have the app write back to the server, what we did is we built a SharePoint list. Nice and simple. They were just using Outlook and Excel spreadsheets anyway, so SharePoint list does the job just fine. And the app writes back to the SharePoint list. Challenges with this is you've got two totally different data sources that need to talk to each other. So you really need to start, when you're building this, thinking about what are the business problems that you're trying to solve, what fields do you need into here, how is the user going to interact with that list, right? We've got a few solutions at North Power where we've got our systems writing directly into the SharePoint list and duplicating a lot of the information in the SharePoint list. But now you've got the same information in two different places. What's your source of truth? Okay. But I didn't want to go down that route too much if I could avoid it for this solution. And that's one of the reasons why I embedded the app inside of the Power BI, so that we didn't have to duplicate all of the address and the identifying information that our guys in the field need to actually do the maintenance on the lines. because sometimes that changes, especially when it's being rescheduled multiple times. It's are changing, but sometimes even like the scope of the job or the nature of the job are changing. We've got different teams. So we've got planned maintenance, we've got corrective maintenance. Sometimes somebody will go out and replace a pole that we're supposed to do planned maintenance on, and it's no longer a wooden pole, it's now a concrete pole, right? So if you've this system talking directly to this one, you need that to happen constantly to make sure the information is up to date. And it requires a lot of expertise, a lot of time, a whole big problem. Again, I'm a Power BI gal, so I was just like, hey, an idea, let's try this. So what we've got here is I've used Microsoft AdventureWorks model, and imagine now that we're going to move out of the power world and into the sales world, and we want to track the reasons that things aren't shipping on time. All right, so we've got things here with lots of late shipping, and we've got this Power App over here. Again, we could add filters. We could add all of that enrichment information about what the product actually is, who the customer is. Any of that information could be added into here. I've kept it pretty basic for now. Depending on time, we can go and have a play with it. As I select something on the left-hand side, updates the Power App in real time on the right. So you'll see if I select something that we haven't already given a reason for the delay to, it only gives me the option to add a new reason. If there's something, so you can see there that it's thinking. If there's something that already has a reason for delay added to it, it gives me the option to add a new reason or to edit the existing reason. Again, all things that we had to consider when we were building the app, the data modeling logic, the ones-to-ones or ones-to-manys, and what do you want to build into it to make possible. So let's start at the top and work our way down. Add a new reason for why this was late in shipping. So we click the button. It takes us to this beautiful Power Apps screen. Connected straight to SharePoint. And simple, this is a choice field in SharePoint. It pulls through automatically. Love low code, no code, right? Yep. So I can pick my category. I can add something in, ice on roads, and submit my reason. So now, that edit existing reason button pops up. Back in there. That reason, edit, and it'll update that back to my SharePoint list, or I can decide that looks fine and go back. Questions so far? Yeah.
How are you, when you update that in SharePoint, is that also updating what we're seeing in Power BI?
No.
So it's just one way?
It's just one, well, yes and no. At the moment, it's just one way. So if we look at what's happening in Power BI, what we've got in Power BI is the SharePoint list here, and then we've got the SQL database here. And if I go and look at that under the hood, sorry, I hate Power BI dark mode, but as an MVP, we're supposed to test these things. So dark mode. Contrast is terrible.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is our with the sales. It has the ship date and the due date. So that's where we can see if the shipments are happening on time. I have combined, because shipping happens at the line number, so I've combined the sales order number with the line number into a dimension table and connected that to my SharePoint list. So because that's my one, my SharePoint list needs to have for that. That's a many. So we can have multiple reasons that that shipment was late because it might just keep getting delayed. Right. So technically it's possible to update that back into Power BI, but because it's not a direct connection to the data warehouse because that's expensive, it's not instant. Right. So one of the challenges with this in business world is that if I'm here and let me make sure that I've got, so that's from my dimension table. So I should be able to put the reason into here. Determine relationships. Let's do it down here. Isn't in here. It will not update. So it's got a reason here.
Mhm.
It's not showing that reason in here. So there's two ways we can solve that. The first way we can solve it is we can put the reason in the Power App, ignore the Power BI report, and just have the live information from the SharePoint list being displayed in the Power App. So to edit the Power App within Power BI, you can do this from desktop. I find it has a variable success rate. Doing it from online works at least 98% of the time. So dots, edit, wait patiently. Eventually a new tab should open and pull up your Power App that you've got this app built in. And then we'll be able to edit and add those reasons into there as subtitles and edit the app, so on and so forth. The 2% of the time that it's not going to work because it's a demo.
Had a pop-up block come up
I
at the end of the URL. The icon with the
hiding behind my screen thing.
might have blocked.
Thank you. Security. So another thing to be aware of when you're doing this type of a solution, if you build the app first, you won't get the Power BI integration for the Power BI data. So you need to build the Power BI app and the data model first, and then build the app as a new app from within Power BI. And what that does is it brings in to your app something called Power BI integration. And so that connects to whatever you have put in the Power Apps data field in the Power BI report. Now, something that I learned, Power Apps has gotten really good at letting you rename things, by the way, which is really fun. Power BI not so much when it integrates with Power Apps. So whatever these fields are currently named, you probably want to keep them named the same thing because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare fixing your app. Good news is I can drag anything into here and rename it. So as long as it's named the same thing in here as it was when I built the app, it won't break my app.
But logic decrees, give it a good name at the beginning, the natural flow goes.
Exactly.
Old school.
Old school, yeah.
But it
Do
works.
it right the first time, right? Yeah. So this is Canvas app. You guys can teach me more than I can teach you. But so this is where we could add something information into here about like the reasons and the stuff and pull that straight from the list and give it space. It can actually show you all of that information. So that's one good for fixing the problem of data not updating back in Power BI. Second option is to use the second Power Platform integration, which is the Power Automate. Got Power Automate visual in Power BI. Again, you can add data, stuff in there. You can format visual. So we can say refresh my data. This is the part that I always struggle with because the project managers that are using this report refresh Power BI data doesn't really mean a hell of a lot to them. So having conversation about what they think it means and what wording to put in there is important. Again, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the Power Apps. 3 dots, edit. And this one might actually open inside Power BI rather than creating a new tab, which is so you've got the option to choose an existing flow or to create a new flow. So this is by button, so it's an instant cloud flow. See that because I created it from within Power BI, it automatically gives me that trigger. Now I'm just going to add Power BI connectors. A data set. We'll choose base fit. I think. We'll pick. I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this because I don't have it connected.
Your environment in Aussie?
My SQL server doesn't have a gateway. Choose workspace, and then we'll choose the data set. Then we'll save. So that's all you need to do. So save and apply. Successfully applied your API connection. Go back to the report. We've now got this beautiful button. The user clicks it, it's going to refresh a totally different set. And we'll then pull through all of those reasons into here. A really long answer to your question.
So when you click the button, the flow is going to refresh the SQL rows that we see above the button?
As well, yes.
Okay.
And that's my problem.
As well as
the SharePoint data.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it will refresh the entire data set.
Yep.
It refreshes the whole thing. And that's why I'm not going to be able to demonstrate it because I don't have a gateway to connect to this SQL data set to be able to refresh it.
Okay, that's cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Challenges with it are permissions. Right? So by having a refresh button inside the report, normally with a Power BI report, when you share the report, you don't have to share rights on the data set. You have to share refresh and edit rights on the data set. So if they don't have the right to refresh the data set, that button's not going to work with them. So you have to give them a little bit more permission than you would normally give to a viewer of a report to enable them to interact with that button.
Can they refresh it using your connection? Because I know in other Power Automate triggered events, you could choose whether it's run by the user who pushes the button versus the creator of the flow.
That is an excellent question. I think technically you could possibly get around that, but because Power BI has its own licensing, I'm not sure that it would totally work.
Yeah.
But something. Okay.
Just whether there's a run only toggle on it that you can whose connection it's running on. Because if you're going to run other things like looking at other data sets, or because that flow could have like many steps through it, you need to know the connection it's using, or like sending an email, whose mailbox does it come from, things like that.
Yes, and the other thing you can do is you can like use composite models and things within the Power BI data model so that they're not refreshing the whole model, and what you're having to give them permission to might be different. You'd have to teach me how to come into here and change what this is, but the connections.
Yeah, maybe if you go into Power Automate and find that flow in the details pane of the flow, it might give you that option.
Good question. Learning from you guys.
Yeah, so you got that run only users panel on the right. If you can edit that and just see whether you can change it to down a little bit. And use this connection. So that by default will be using your connection to do the data refresh, or you could change it to use their connection.
So do I have to invite the users that I want to use my connection for that?
Yeah.
It's only going to give them connections to that, not to all the other connections in the flow.
Well, that's where it gets a bit dangerous, because you potentially could invite them in to use your mailbox to send emails and things like that.
Yeah. What I love about shared flows. I always make the users create it and share it with me rather than the other way around. Be better.
So one thing I always struggle with is just that concept at the very beginning of whether you're building a dashboard and then embedding an app, or you're building an app and then embedding the Power BI into the app. Like how do you decide which?
Like I said, it was as simple as I live in dashboards. So my world is Power BI. That's what I know. And so that's where I start.
Yeah.
And whatever makes sense to you, like Pro Code is your language. That's why you did the get products in Pro Code, right? We can do it in low code, but what's going to be easier, it's going to take more time, right? The other thing that probably the better question to ask is, who are you building it for? What do they know? And at North Power, we have one app that is our Nominate app, and it's new. And so Power Apps is not a huge thing as an organization-wide. We've got other apps that are in smaller teams, but as far as organizational apps, Power Apps goes, we only have one. As far as Power BI reports and dashboards goes, our data maturity isn't fantastic, but it's pretty good. We've got lots of certified data sets that people can pull on. We've got lots of certified Power BI apps that basically collections of reports. So it's a very familiar space for our users to be going into Power BI. They're already in Power BI. Building this because we wanted visibility for us as well as the customer, and our apps with customers. Great. And so the app is embedded inside of a report that is shared internally, but then that data is also being used in a report that's shared externally, and those both sit within the same Power BI, called an app in the Power BI space, but it's not a Power App. Which, so yeah, probably the best question is like, who are you building it for and where do they live? And then if that doesn't matter, what do you know best is where I default to.
Do you have any security concerns around SharePoint in terms of sure that data the reasons in SharePoint is only available to the people who should see it, or is that just not a concern for that type of data in the organization?
For this particular solution, that wasn't a concern.
Okay.
But I have built solutions, similar solutions before where that is a concern. And I'm not sure if there's a solution for this yet. Like row level security and SharePoint lists. Someday there will be. But the way we solved that at the time is we used Power Automate to write to the SharePoint list and then move it out of there as soon as it was written and move it into a secure space. So the hoops you jump through to save the money on things like Dataverse. Is that what it's called these days?
Jealousy of free.
Yeah, Mark.
Yes.
Earn so much money by your tattling.
You do indeed. But yeah, once they start wanting security things, I kind of bow out and say, look, there's better ways to do this. You need to look at a proper system. So for this one, that wasn't a concern. It was just a real simple, we're literally using emails to track this right now.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I said I've got what, like 10 minutes left? We had time, but look, what I can do is in desktop, I will refresh the point list. Through. And so that's essentially what that button in the Power BI report would do online if I had the gateway online. And so it would be able to into that. For this demo, I've kept it really simple. The SharePoint list is literally just taking the key, the reason, and the description. Usually I would chuck a date in there as well because dates are pretty important. And whatever you're putting in there, you need to be making sure that you've got some way to link it back to the Power BI report. So what I did for this one is the key that connects it to this table is actually a free text field in SharePoint, but I've used the Power app to put the default field in there from Power BI. So that's actually coming from the Power BI integration data directly so that the end user doesn't have to fat finger or get anything. And it's a free text field in SharePoint so that it writes back really easily. I could even like make that not editable and make it. Sometimes I'll even do that if it's a date field, like I won't make it I consider whether or not to make it a date field in SharePoint or not. So
If you came up with another reason, that one of your drop-down boxes, your other reasons. So therefore, if you typed in another reason, that type back to the list.
yeah, so this all comes directly. So this one I did from the list. This one I did as a choice field.
Where you select other.
Yeah.
And it's to say, the plane crash.
Yeah.
Just so, would that then automatically go back to the list, or that was the question?
I haven't allowed them to update
I haven't. That was
items in the list. Yeah, so there's only those 4 reasons in the list. So if you did airplane crash, that's just in a free text field.
Yeah.
So it's not going to update back to the SharePoint list.
But it would pay though to, if you could, way of capturing that somehow, if you selected other your list later, there might 5 people might have added 6 things and suddenly
Yeah,
list.
which is
Because otherwise
why I have
it's
that.
duplicating.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I have that turned off, right? Because and it's going to make your reporting look pretty rubbish as well. So I've only got 4 categories. I only want 4 categories, right? And then if I start to see airplane crash as a common theme,
Yeah.
then I can go back and add it to the list and add that as a reason. We can start to expand out some of those others.
Hopefully nobody's been in an airplane crash with them. Traumatized anyway.
So yeah, that editing the default, and I'm sure there's more elegant ways to do this, but I've done it by
Well done.
using a gallery that I've hidden. In the real solution, I used what do you call it? Collections. So one way to more than one way to do things.
Extras.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but fun getting back into Power Apps. Yeah, it had been a few years since I had used it in the real world, and like I said, I was very pleasantly surprised to see how easy it was to rename things, and it just
I've come a long way in the last 2 years.
has. But I use it every day, so that one wasn't as surprising. Any other comments, or think of any other use cases for this type of like real simple bare bones solution?
Really quick one. So you'll have people that are going out on the road to effectively go do this work, and for what number of reasons they may get turned around. You were saying earlier there's like some paper that they may need to fill out as well. I'm just kind of curious how that like kind of feeds back into the system. Like I assume someone's got to sit there and unfortunately try to read some handwriting. I know myself, I write code, so my handwriting's terrible.
Yeah.
Text.
Yep.
So most of the tasks that we do, we've now got like jot forms or forms. So there's only a few that are still paper based, and they're not the ones that we're actually tracking for this particular scenario. So it was primarily like Outlook emails and things we're tracking their so yeah, nobody to read the paper for this one. It's more replacing like emails of and that's another thing that like could be extended onto the solution is, and one that I'm working on at the moment, actually triggering an email. That's the way they were tracking it before. And emails, apparently some people like having 100 emails a day that tells them that this has happened and then just ignoring them. And so when you move into like a system and those emails disappear, they get concerned. So adding those emails back in and automating that's all really easy to do. So anything else?
You touch much in Copilot in the Power BI space?
Yes. I'm not worried about it taking my job. It's really cool in the demos. It's really expensive for what value it gives you. It's not any better than just using the Copilot that you've got and copying and pasting it into Power BI at the moment. I do like using it for DAX and coding, but it doesn't have the understanding of the star schema and the data models in Power BI, which is not surprising because most of the SQL warehousing people that I work with don't have that to see either. And so when I ask Copilot to generate a measure, it will generate a measure between 2 completely unrelated tables and do a cross join. And I'm like, well, that's useless. And so whilst having it in Power BI desktop is helpful because it has access to my data model and can give me the names of the tables, I know my code environment in DAX well enough to be able to just do my Control L and find and replace and copy and paste it from ChatGPT and Copilot and have it be just as quick because it doesn't understand the meaning of the model, if that makes sense. And then it's good at creating visuals and getting insights, but it's not any better than the auto create this report that you get for free in Power BI.